We've got some good ones here, so Conan, can you come on over and start with this one? The Bible, so this isn't so much from tonight, but this is something that someone's been thinking about. The Bible talks about fearing God, uses that language, fear God. Why is that? Obedience is one thing, maybe trust is another thing, but fearing God, they can feel a bit uncomfortable just the thought of that. What do we make of that?
Yeah, that's a good question, isn't it? Fear is not a bad thing in and of itself. I don't particularly like heights. If I'm standing on the edge of a cliff that goes 100 kilometres down and I'm feeling scared, that's not a bad thing, because I could die. So, fear in and of itself is not a bad thing. It depends on what God is like, and God. So some of these questions, just a lot of questions. It's a good question to make your brain hurt. If you try and think about the universe starting, and if God created the universe, and you can ask, how you did that later if you want. If you have the power to create the whole universe, you're reasonably powerful. Donald Trump thinks he's powerful. He's got nothing on God. You think to create a world, a solar system, a galaxy, a universe, that is massive power. So it's like an atomic bomb. In one sense, an atomic bomb is scary because it's powerful. The other thing is that God is very, 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 he's completely, perfectly good. So you're putting a good being and a powerful being together, that's who he is. And so if you're right with him, if you're friends with him, there's nothing at all to be scared that he's going to hurt you. The Bible describes him as a father to a child. And he is the most loving being there is. And we could talk a lot about that. And so he's very, very powerful to be able to create the whole universe in all its spectacular glory, and yet also really, really good. He's not like, at school you sometimes learn about Greek gods, which are kind of flip here and there and are capricious and kind of, you never know if how they wake up in the bed that morning. Are they going to boof me in the head, or are they going to give me a hug? I don't know. God's not like that at all. He's stable. So he's powerful, he's good, and he's stable. And so the question is, am I right with him? Am I friends with him? Is he my father, or am I okay with him? If that's the case, you don't need to quiver in your boots at all, because metaphorically speaking, he'll give you a hug. There is a thing though, that if you did have to be on the wrong side of him, then that could be a concerning thing. And we'll talk about that in a few weeks' time. And so I won't say a whole lot of that. Tonight's going to be frustrating because a few times I'm going to say, it's going to come up in a few weeks. And I could give, a dodgy answer, or just a too brief answer that won't be full enough to make good sense, but I'll leave it to maybe ask the question again in a few weeks' time. So just that, the Bible does talk about fearing him because of who he is, his powerful nature. If you're on his good side, the Bible says you're okay, don't worry about him. Respect him because he's your father and a great God who is powerful. But if we're not right with him, then fear is an appropriate thing, and we'll talk about that, particularly after the third week. If someone wanted to ask that question again, that will make a lot more sense.
Along those same lines, there's a few other questions that I know will be a bit more answered as we roll on. So just to whet your appetite, look forward to some things. Why does being a Christian take so much effort? How do I really know that I'm a Christian, and not just saying the words I'm a Christian, but how do I really know that? And I want to believe, but I don't trust my thinking on the proof. So there's some good questions there. They're going to be answered as we roll on. But here's one. I have a God-sized hole in me. How do I know when it is filled? So that's helpful because it's along the same lines of what we're talking about tonight, about this whole issue of the good life and satisfaction and fulfillment. How does somebody know when they've sort of got that?
That's another good question. It's a harder question to answer because it's talking about a feeling type of thing. What's it exactly? How do I know? I have
a God-sized hole in me. How do I know when it is filled?
So there's something, depends on... So coming to know God will give you a deep contentment and get deep joy. It doesn't make you feel happy, bubbly all the time. And the Bible talks about people who follow God being in depths of despair at some times because of the circumstances around them. But even in those bad circumstances, they still have a contentment and joy. It's a deep thing. So, for example, the whole Israel people were being hammered by the Babylonians, and it was horrific. The Babylonians were killing people, they were starving. This is a historical fact around 500 BC. And you see lament happening. They're wailing, what's going on, God? But they're still trusting Him, they're still stable, they're still okay amongst that. And that's what we're talking about, the deep contentment you can have with a relationship with God, because even when life is horrible around you, you can keep going. But it doesn't mean you're frivolously, oh, isn't it fantastic? You know, my wife died yesterday. It's not that silliness. But it is a contentment. It's like you're a solid rock because you have a relationship with God who is the solid rock. And so you can cope when things are bad. But sometimes life is, and I speak to people all the time who's, speaking to a friend whose 16-year-old son was diagnosed with melanoma. There's a messenger conversation today with a uni friend of mine. How do you cope through that? Now, she actually isn't a believer. But if you are someone who trusts in God, you can cope through that. So there's that deep contentment and joy that's not frivolous, but allows you to keep going. And it will come out what that actually looks like as we build up the picture of what a Christian is as we go over kind of week 3 and 4 and 5. So that's kind of a broad question, answer to a broad question. But again, some of these questions you may want to come back in. And feel free to ask those again later on, because I think they will have more. It'll be easier to have the explanation when you've got some more of the content.
Cool. How do I know when Jesus is speaking to me?
Yeah, really good question. Really good question. Really, really important question. The big question is, how do I know? That's related to that. How do I know God, and how is He revealing Himself to me? That's kind of things that speaking is one aspect of that, isn't it? Because he's a personal being, he's going to reveal himself personally. He's not like a force, like in Star Wars, the force be with you. That was meant to be done. That was really bad. Terrible. Just a well-known acting. So is it not? So was that?
Or on camera.
Yeah, that's right. You can edit that out. It's not like an electricity force type of thing. He's a personal being, as Jesus actually was. You could have touched him. Because he's a personal being, he reveals himself like any personal being will reveal themselves. And how do they do that? They speak. So if this is a weird example, I don't do this, but say you're at my house, we have a room under us, a tiny little kind of, you put suitcases thing underneath the stairs. Say I was in that room. I don't hang out there. I'm not getting a bad picture. It's an illustration, okay? We don't have Harry Potter under there either. But say I'm under there and you come into my house, you've never met me before. You could actually still get to know me even though you don't see me by me speaking to you and talking about myself, and you could talk. So another way of thinking about it is if you're overseas and we can't have the modern technologies, but I could speak to you and reveal myself to you by writing, or I think actually you were talking about this kind of thing recently, like being a pen pal. So I can still reveal myself by words. So the question is, how do I know those words? And I want to say the Bible claims about itself as being God's revelation of himself to us. So he is saying, God says in the past, in the Old Testament, in bits and pieces, he revealed himself in different ways. And in the New Testament, he reveals himself most fully by coming to earth. God comes to earth as Jesus and goes, this is who I am. And the New Testament records all this stuff about Jesus so that we know Jesus. If you happen to be 2,000 years ago, you could have actually listened to Jesus audibly give a sermon, like a talk like I just did then. He's not actually on earth in that physical form like he was then, so you can read his words in the Bible. So the best place to know, the question was, how do I know if Jesus is speaking to me? The best place to go is his word in the Bible, because that is certain. God could and can speak to people, and it's recorded in the Bible in the Old Testament, sometimes him doing that audibly. Sometimes the person is told that God's spoken to him, we're not told that how. They come up as a thought. sometimes he's used dreams and that type of thing. I want to say that happens. I want to say, how do you know when it's God speaking to you and not just your own head? And I want to go, if I know this Bible is certainly God's word and certainly God revealing himself to us, then I'm going to line up the other things, whether it's a thought in my head or a dream or something like that, in line with the word. Because I have had people who will say they're Christians who come up with weird stuff saying, Jesus told me this. To make the point, and this is not made up, a guy, didn't say this to me personally, but a guy told me, hey, God told me to leave my wife and go with this other woman. Now I want to say I know that's not from God, but the question is, how do I know that's not from God? Who's it meant to judge? Well, it's not meant to judge in that sense, but the Bible says that's not what God wants. And so I'm not going to take this person's thought, I'm going to keep going back to the Bible. Other things, I know a Muslim guy who I used to read the Bible with, who became a Christian. He came to, one of them came to know Jesus through a dream. But he didn't have access to the Bible because he was in Iran. And so that's slightly unusual. But if you want to be certain about how to know God, come to the Bible. You want to know certain what Jesus wants you to do, come to the Bible. And then the other thing associated with that, if it's not in the Bible, it's not as concerned with what God wants from you anyhow. For example, should I buy, I don't care about cars, but some people here will go, oh, should I buy a Ford or a Holden? God doesn't care. Should I support Manly or Parramatta? God doesn't care.
Yes, no.
I knew someone would say. I knew someone would grab it. Why? Because it's not important in the Bible. God's told us in the Bible the most significant things. Now that doesn't mean the Bible talks about everything. It doesn't talk to you about how to make a cup of tea or how electricity works or how to make an atomic bomb or anything like that. But it's about how to have a relationship with him, and those topics are the most significant things. And then how to live life. So he's more concerned, should I be a teacher or a sparky? God doesn't care. Should I be an honest teacher or a non-honest teacher? Or should I be an honest sparky or a non-honest sparky? God says, be an honest sparky or an honest teacher. So he's more concerned with how at that point you're living if you follow him, not which type of job you do. And so those type of things is, what does God want from me? He wants a relationship with me. How do we know about that? That's what we cover in life. Talking about the things that we don't find in the Bible, he's not as concerned with. But if you want to know how he speaks to you, look at the Bible most significantly. That's a long question. You can get the answer.
All right, so there was a few questions. This will be our last one. It's actually a few questions that touch on the same thing, or a similar thing. So I'll ask them together. So you're saying that Jesus is God. This person has previously thought has wondered whether he's just a human with a divine connection to God, and maybe a pathway to God. So is he human? Is he God? And this other person has asked along the same lines, I thought he was God sort of up there who sent Jesus down here to sort of deliver his word along with the disciples. But now we're saying he's God. So which is he? Is he kind of that messenger from God, or is he God? Does that make sense?
How long can I answer this? That was a short question. Now it's a long question. That is a really that's a massively good question, and it's a question that makes your brain hurt. I'll say a couple. I'll try and do this quickly. In the Old Testament, in the first part of the Bible, there were people who were messengers of God. They were often called prophets. A guy called Moses, a guy called Jeremiah, a guy called Isaiah. They were people like us that God spoke through and spoke to his people through them. And they were like messengers from God, but they weren't God, they were just blokes. So that's just saying that Jesus was more than that. Now, this is where our brain's going to hurt. We learn stuff usually by going from known to unknown. We're going to now talk about God, who is completely and utterly unique and one of a kind and is not like anything else. So how do you kind of get conceptually into your head what he is like? What I'm saying is what the Bible is representing. And because it's unique, we kind of go, that seems unusual. So if I want to say to you, if I speak to a Canadian or American and never seen a koala before and TV exists and like that, I can say, well, a koala, it's a bit like a bear, little one, cute, chews on leaves, not people. I can say that's what acquired. What I've just done then is gone from known, they know about big bears, grizzly bears, and this is the little bear. When you go for God, what are you comparing like? There is nothing. So all I can do is say, well, this is what He has revealed to me, and to us, and to people, by looking at the Bible. And He says that He is one God, 3 persons. Okay, so this is unusual, and if you're talking about the creator of the universe, so Him being unusual, that's okay. He's one God, 3 persons, so He said His Father, Son, and Spirit. And they've always been before the universe was created, and they created everything. So they've always, the Father, Son, and Spirit, one God of 3 persons is always there. God then, His Son, who has always existed, came to earth at Christmas time through Mary and became a man. That's what the Bible says. There's a whole 1,000, I'm hoping a whole 1,000 people questions are coming in your head. You know, all these things can happen. And therefore, Jesus, the Bible is saying, is fully man, so he was a person who had arms, legs, blood, exactly like us, and yet he was also God. So, God and man, 100% God, 100% man. And that is good because he reveals God truly and completely. There was one of his disciples says, Jesus, show us the Father. This guy called Philip. And basically Jesus says, look, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Because he is God and can represent God truly. Whereas the prophets beforehand kind of give you bits and pieces. It's kind of like, say I'm writing a letter to Michael, and this is what I'm like, my family, like what we did before, and this is what I studied, and this is what I enjoy for sport. And then, that's kind of like the prophets in the Old Testament, little bits and pieces. But then I come and speak with Michael, I turn up to Michael's house and we have a conversation. That's kind of like the prophets in the Old Testament giving bits and pieces, and then God actually coming and revealing who he is in himself. And that's why Mary was freaked out. That's why people were so astounded. God becomes flesh, becomes a person. And the Bible goes on about that a fair bit because it's so unusual. And so, that's, so he's God and he's man, he's unique. Is that good enough, I think?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Thanks, Connor. You guys give a round of applause. Thanks to stand up and get under the bunch of questions. It's really good. Now, we talk a lot about the Bible, okay? We said the Bible this, the Bible that, the Bible says this, the Bible says that. How do you know if the Bible's reliable? Because do you know when the Bible was written? 2,000 years ago. It was like the latest parts of the Bible. That's a long time. So over that time, maybe it's changed. Maybe what they wrote down originally is different to what we actually have now. Because, it gets passed on through the generations and people tweak it and they alter it, they change it. It gets lost and found. And did that happen? And more than that, was it actually true in the first place? This stuff about Jesus, we keep going on about Jesus and we know Jesus through these words in the Bible. Can we actually trust that what they wrote down was true? That it actually happened, that this man called Jesus died on the cross, rose from the dead, all this stuff that you may have heard little bits of. How do we even know that it's true? That's what we're talking about next week. Really crucial stuff to think about if you're going to sort of think about life with Jesus. We need to know, can we trust the Bible? That's what we're going to spend our whole week covering. Hope you've enjoyed tonight. We start here 7:15. Next Wednesday night, we'll see you then.